Earlier this month, Steve Paikin posed a question in a blog post to our viewers. Which parts of Bill 115, the Putting Students First Act, should we focus on? And you responded. In droves, in fact, on our blog post via Twitter and Facebook. And so joining us now to help us answer some of your questions and for the latest developments with Bill 115, we're joined by Kate Hammer, education reporter with the Globe and Mail. Hi, Kate. Nice to see you again.
Hi.
Nice to have you back on the agenda. Okay. This week was a big week when it comes to relationships between teachers, secondary school teachers, and the government. What happened this week? Why did negotiations between the Ontario government and the OSSTF, the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation, break down?
The short answer is young teachers. They're trying to protect their young teachers. Really, if you look back over the weekend, OSSTF and the province went back to the table. I think everyone would agree that both parties were really trying to get a deal, or at least to a point. We're trying to get a deal. Late in the morning, on Monday morning, OSSTF left the table. And both parties have said that really the issue was whether we would maintain raises for younger teachers who climb a pay grid, right? They start out at about $40,000 and climb to as high as 90, and those raises take effect automatically each year. And the unions have fought really hard to keep that for the young teachers. While they accept zeros for everybody else, they fought really hard to keep that for young teachers, and they just couldn't agree.
Okay, so they walked away, and then classes resume Monday, kids go back to school. How does the OSSTF go about protesting this bill? In other words, what duties are teachers not doing right now?
Administrative duties is really it distilled. So at the high school level, that means things like reporting your attendance to the principal. At the Toronto board specifically, they've not reported grades into the system, into the centralized report card system. And then I think the more precarious thing is that it means no supervision. They're not stepping out into the hallways to make sure kids are safe. They're not going into the cafeteria to keep an eye on kids. Now, I should say, in most of those cases, school boards have made provisions to make sure there is someone watching, but usually it's teachers doing that and they're not doing it anymore.
Who's doing it? Principals?
Principals, sometimes some school boards like Toronto have a lot of hall monitors that they hire separately, so they were already there, so it was less of an issue. But especially at smaller schools and in smaller school boards, principals are having to work really, really hard to keep up the slack and keep an eye on everyone.
Okay, I just want to clarify. We need to clarify this. Who does this strike action include? Are we talking about all teachers?
We're talking about, right now, it's high school teachers.
Yep.
And it includes full-time teachers and substitute teachers. There's also some, in different pockets, it includes different types of education workers. So sometimes it can be education assistants, early childhood educators, clerical workers, maintenance staff. Even within the Catholic boards, actually, this transcends public and Catholic.
So, because we've just heard this as public schools. You're saying that no, in some Catholic schools, this work protest is taking effect.
Yeah, Catholic schools are feeling the effects of this to a much lesser degree, and within the Catholic schools, it tends to be more the sort of support staff. So the impact on students is much smaller. Okay,
and across Ontario, across every school board?
No, we've got 20 at this point. The vast majority of them are public. I think the Catholic boards, they tend to be smaller boards, and there's about 3 or 4 of them. And then otherwise, it's all public school boards, the big ones being Toronto District School Board, Halton District School Board, a few others, right across the province.
But tens of thousands of students, thousands of teachers are involved in all of this.
Absolutely.
In being impacted by all that. Okay, take me into an Ontario public high school where this protest of Bill 115 is going on. What is daily life like now, this week, if I walked into a high school?
The good news is it hasn't changed dramatically. They're really, the day is running pretty smoothly. The problem is more, the people who are feeling this the most, absolutely, are principals. They're making up the slack, they're working overtime, they have been all year to try and make up a lot of the duties that teachers aren't doing. The stuff that kids are feeling actually predates the strike action. It was really the voluntary stuff that teachers do, the extracurriculars, which they withdrew right back in September. And especially the high school students are really lamenting the loss of things like clubs and their sports teams. They've had walkouts. All year the kids have really been showing their their unhappiness with the current situation.
You know, it's interesting though, you mentioned that, you know, there aren't people monitoring the cafeterias. Teachers aren't doing that. That's one of the things that they're not doing this week. Does that not raise a safety concern at some schools?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, what I'm hearing is, in general, it's the big schools that are concerned. The lucky thing is that a lot of those bigger schools already had staff that aren't part of the Ontario Secondary Teachers Federation, right, who aren't on strike, who were in charge of monitoring. So that's where you have people like hall monitors stepping in. So far we've been able to avoid any kind of major problems. Certainly though in Ottawa, and the school board has said this wasn't connected to the job action, but we did see a big food fight break out in Ottawa this week. You know, I guess it's a little debatable why exactly, but that's the kind of thing that will happen and continue to happen as long as the strike action continues.
Okay, I want to remind our viewers that we're broadcasting your comments and questions about Bill 115, the ones that you sent to us on our website via Twitter and on our Facebook page. Okay, Kate Hammer, give me some context here. You know, if you think back a few years ago, I'm not sure that most people, I would say almost anyone thought that this government, led by the Premier, who has long been dubbed the Education Premier, would have these kinds of relationships with teachers. I mean, in the broader picture, what was the turning point? When did things go so sour between our provincial government and teachers?
It's a great question. When I started covering education about 3 years ago, I never would have imagined this. It's, you know, somewhere in the vicinity of a year ago that things, you know, the relationship starts getting tense. There were really, I think, the first signs of trouble back in February when the province came to the bargaining table with, with all the unions, and the biggest union, the Elementary Teachers Federation, walked away pretty quickly, I think within an hour, and said this isn't working. And since then, it's just been building momentum. And we're at a point now where I'm hearing more and more. I mean, I first started hearing it from the unions. Dalton McGuinty is the worst premier we've seen since Mike Harris. And when I first heard it, you know, it seemed a bit outlandish to me. I mean, it didn't make sense to me.
Mike Harris, who, you know, was hated by, and I think hate is not not a weak word to use in this circumstance, was hated by most teachers.
Absolutely. He did some rearrangements to the education system, found some savings, found some efficiencies in the system that a lot of people within the education system sector will say were really harmful. You know, I think you can debate the merits of what he did, but still to this day, I mean, Mike Harris, his name is used as it's a name used with a bit of disdain. And so this shift from Dalton McGuinty for like 8 years being the education premier, and there's this cozy relationship with the unions, with the school boards, with teachers, everything was great. Great policies that were really popular with parents and teachers, things like caps on primary school sizes, right? The full-day kindergarten program. And then suddenly this. And more and more, I'm hearing people, you make that comparison between Dalton McGuinty and Mike Harris. And I tell you, 3 years ago, I would have said that would never happen.
I don't think anyone was betting on that comparison 3 years ago. Okay, and then this government, Laurel Broughton, the education minister, Premier McGuinty, bring in Bill 115. What month was that in?
That was, well, they introduced it in August.
Okay, so what does that allow? Because there's been, you know, I've heard Laurel Broughton talking about this, and I've heard the various union leaders talking about this, and there seems to me not to be a real clarity about what Bill 115 enables the Ontario government to do. You are here to bring me and our audience clarity. What does it allow the government to do?
It does give the government a lot of power. I think the interesting thing about Bill 115 is you could either say it's the bill that saved the school year or it's the bill that ruined the school year. Depends on who you ask. So, I mean, really what the government would say was we introduced this bill so that we could avoid teacher pay raises, what I was talking about, the younger teachers, those pay raises from taking effect in the fall automatically, because we didn't have a deal, and those would have come in automatically, cost hundreds of millions of dollars, would have had to come out of other places, probably the classroom, for school boards to pay for them, and could have caused a lot of, potentially, it's debatable, a lot of damage to the classroom. And so it enforced terms that got rid of those pay raises and said, teachers, you can't strike, and you can't appeal to anybody, and you can't go to court with us, and this is how it's going to go.
Okay, you can't go to court with us. And yet, every time I hear the union, a union leader being interviewed, they said, we're going to challenge this in court.
So there are sort of certain courts they can't go to. They've left it open that they can make I think it's a human rights challenge of this bill, and they have. And it will be very interesting to see where that decision falls.
We're going to talk more about the potential legal challenges in this in a minute. But one of the big questions that I've heard people asking is that, this government, we all know this province is in poor financial shape, that they've said public sector workers across the board are going to have to take wage freezes, so on and so forth. Why was the province able to reach then an agreement with French and Catholic school teachers, and yet seemingly is having so much difficulty with the OSSTF?
Also a touchy area. I think it's easy to say that the deal that the government drafted was easier for Catholic teachers and French teachers to swallow than it was for the public teachers. A good example being sick days. So part of what the bill also imposes actually is cuts to sick days from 20 to 10, and you can't bank them and then take cash at retirement, sort of like $45,000 I think teachers could collect when they retired. And so because a lot of deals are different board to board, it just works out that within the Catholic system in particular, a lot of them didn't have that deal anyway. So when you're handed at the provincial level a deal that says no more of that, for a lot of teachers it was kind of moot.
Okay.
There's another interesting subtext, I think, and it's debatable how much this was an impact, but the Catholic system faced a lot of anti-Catholic blowback in the spring following the gay-straight alliance debate, right? The Catholic schools weren't very comfortable having gay-straight alliances as part of the anti-bullying bill, and that kind of ignited a big conversation about why do we still fund Catholic education. This was a great way for them to curry some favor with the province, and then also to sort of be able to say, well, here we are, it's September, life in the public schools is rather disrupted, but the Catholic schools are generally a rather peaceful oasis.
Okay. The vast, vast majority of our feedback really was over 115 is the anger over what many people say is the government's infringement on collective bargaining rights of teachers. What is the government's case for the constitutionality of this bill?
So they're going to look at the precedent comes out of BC. And there's a case there involving health workers where the government imposed the terms of a contract and they basically threw it at the union, said this is what it is, and 20 minutes later it's being written into law. And so the government's going to make the case that they were at the bargaining table back in February, that the OECTA deal, which is sort of framework of this legislation, the Catholic deal, which is the framework, was out there in July. And so we had months and months of bargaining and talking before it became law. And then they've left this clause, which is very important too, to say that bargaining can continue until the end of December.
Okay. The union's case for saying this bill is unconstitutional?
Well, they're going to say, first of all, that the union or that the province never really bargained, that they basically came to the table and said, lump it or leave it. And there are some really tough elements to that bill. You can't challenge this anywhere. We can block a strike. But that's why we've seen the strike action launched in the schools. The government has this power to stop it, and they haven't. Because if they do, it really hurts their court case.
All right, we've got about 2 minutes left. I want to play a clip from a program we did a few weeks ago with two lawyers on the legal challenges of Bill 115.
I do think the trade unions face an uphill battle if, in fact, they had an opportunity for a meaningful process of collective bargaining prior to the introduction of the legislation. If they had the opportunity to make representations to the government, and the government can prove that it considered those representations in good faith, then it is an uphill battle for a successful challenge.
I think that the unions have a strong claim, and I think what's important for the public to take away from this is to look at the implications of this, like I said, for the quality of our democracy. Governments cannot treat charter rights as something that's inconvenient.
Okay, Kate, you're not a lawyer, but you've spoken to lots of legal experts. Based on those conversations, who's more likely to win a legal challenge in court?
I don't think I can answer that any more than the lawyer. I mean, the lawyers I speak to generally say, I don't know, and I'm going to be very interested to see what happens. The government has an interesting precedent in that Supreme Court case with BC in the 20 minutes. They've definitely gone beyond that, but they also have a bill that clearly seems to put some tough limitations on teachers.
Okay, Kate, thanks for joining us. We will be hearing lots more from reporters like yourself. This issue is not going anywhere. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.